So, welcome to Pearced Off, and I am Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This week I'm going to speak to you a little bit about whether the world that we live in, you and I, is the best possible world, and in this world, in this concept of the world that we have, does God have free will? So, let us assume the triple properties of the classical approach to God, that being that he's omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent, so all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-loving. So in terms of the classic problem of evil argument, if there is too much evil in the world, God knows what to do about it, is powerful enough to do it, and is loving enough to want to do something about it. So this argument has been around since the days of Epicurus and still remains one of the most hotly debated theological issues in modern times, causing many believers to leave the fold due to its evidential power. Now, there are differences between the evidential and the logical problem of evil, but that's basically the problem of evil in a nutshell. That said, logically, the theist can still defend their belief in God and the accusation that either God does not exist or that he does not possess one, two, or any of those properties. And they can do this, and they often do, by employing the ubiquitous "God moves in mysterious ways," or "you cannot know the mind of God." What this equates to is the a priori claim that God does have those three characteristics, and that therefore all the pain and suffering in the world is not gratuitous, but part of the grander plan and vision of an all-loving, all-knowing, and all-powerful super-being. Although it's very difficult to logically disprove this defense, it does have some rather serious ramifications for the Christian theist, because God is claimed as being all-loving. It means that any decision that God makes, any actualization of events and matter and so forth, must be the most loving that can be. It means that every decision made must be the most caring or loving decision that could possibly be made in terms of some criteria or some outcome. Since God is omniscient and given a possibility of, say, middle knowledge or any other mechanism for divine foreknowledge, God knows every possible outcome for every actualization of every possible world. And God evidently chose this one. First of all, the ramifications are fairly clear for God's own free will. Since he must do what is maximally loving at all times, he cannot do otherwise. One could argue then that God does not have free will himself. Without the ability to act contrary to his omnibenevolence, he has only one course of action that he can possibly take, or courses of action that contain equal quantities of lovingness, for want of a better term. A theist could argue that God could do otherwise, but chooses not to. It's in his nature not to. This is akin to the taxman analogy. And this goes as follows. A taxman assesses your business. He says that you have a tax bill for $25,000. He gives you the choice of paying it or not paying it. The free choice is yours. However, by not paying it, you will go to prison. Or to make the analogy more powerful, you will be sentenced to death. Thus, you have a free choice where you can exercise your free will, but one choice will result in your imminent imprisonment or death. So what will it be? You can argue perhaps that you have free will, but you can also argue that this is an effective denial of free will. You're always going to choose that one particular choice. In the same way, God could potentially, theoretically choose in a way that was not maximally loving, but he never would because it's against his all-loving nature. And this is a grey area of free will, understandably. There is a debate here as to whether God does not have omnipotence and whether omnipotence can be a mere potentiality. If it is a potentiality that can never be made real and existent, then does this equate to it not existing? That is to say, if God could do otherwise, but never would, in fact, actually do otherwise, then his ability to do otherwise is mere potential. It's just a sort of sidestepping of the issue. But the main point to be made here is as follows. It seems then that if God is to keep his omnibenevolent characteristic, then this world must be the maximally perfect and loving world that there can be. If God is perfect, then This must be the most perfect creation. A perfect God could not create something that fell short of perfection, and an all-loving God could not create something that did not fulfill the criterion of being the most loving creation. Now, I know that I've spoke on a previous podcast about perfection and the term perfection itself being incoherent, but for the point of this argument, the fact that I'm arguing from a theistic point of view, these terms have to be coherent for their own worldview to make any sense, their own idea of God to make any sense. The slightly worrying outcome is that this world, where 250,000 people and millions of animals are killed in a tsunami, where anywhere between 20% and 75% of fetuses are naturally aborted, where cancer and malaria are rife, where a global flood killed all the population of Earth bar 8 and all the animals bar some, where forest fires kill baby deer. This world is a world where these events are perhaps even necessary for it to be the most loving world. Moreover, the Westboro Baptist Church, the church that stands around celebrating the death of soldiers as their bodies are brought back, and that stand around celebrating God's judgment and God hates fags and all of these disturbing, disgusting views that they have about society. This argument that I'm putting forward may actually mean that they're in some kind of twisted sense of logic in celebrating the death of every soldier and celebrating the outcome of pretty much anything as being the righteous judgment of an all-loving God. That judgment, their celebration of that judgment, is possibly logically consistent. They realize that this judgment by God to actualize this particular world must be supremely wise and must result in the most loving world. So everything that takes place, that God allows to take place, could indeed be necessary for this outcome. And this includes every piece of suffering and death experienced by every animal and plant in the history of the world. And let me just repeat that. So if God is all-loving and all-powerful and omniscient and has created this one world, and this world must adhere to his characteristics in its creation, then this perfection includes every piece of suffering and death experienced by every animal and plant in the history of the universe. If this is where logic takes a Christian, then they can keep their God in all his maximal perfection, and while they're at it, they can package up all the pain and suffering and send it return post to the pearly gates. It's not needed here, thanks. So, it's a little bit to think about. As ever, check out my blog. I am a tippling philosopher. Check out some of my books, Free Will, Little Book of Unholy Questions, and The Nativity, A Critical Examination. And as ever, question everything.